What can drive a man to publicly humiliate his bride and best friend on the day that was meant to be the happiest of his life? At 8:35 p.m. on October 14, 2023, Jason Walker stood at the podium of his own wedding reception and shattered everything, exposing a painful betrayal that no one, least of all his guests, could have predicted. The evening had begun like any other elegant wedding, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm, golden glow over the grand ballroom, and guests swirling in quiet celebration. Michelle, glowing in her satin wedding gown, sat at the head of the table, beaming with joy. Beside her stood Terrence, Jason's childhood best friend, the best man, with a tight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But as Jason stood before the guests, ready to give the usual heartfelt speech, something was different. His calm demeanor, while seemingly composed, hid a storm brewing underneath. Jason's voice, smooth and steady, began with the customary thank yous, but as his words progressed, the room grew heavy with tension. "It's rare to find a love that lasts," Jason said, his eyes scanning the room, but his words felt colder with each passing moment. But sometimes, life doesn't go according to plan. The guests, some of whom had begun to exchange knowing glances, couldn't have anticipated what was to come next. Jason's words cut through the air with a brutal clarity. "I learned that trust is the most important thing between two people. And when that trust is broken, you can't unlearn what you've learned." Thank you for watching and joining us on this journey. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content. Your support means the world to us, and we'd love for you to be part of our community. Let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in Jason's place? Would revenge have been your choice? Or would you have found another way to heal? With those words, Jason turned the tables on his own wedding, revealing that Michelle, his fiancée, the woman he was about to marry, had betrayed him. Not with a stranger, but with Terrence, his best friend, the man he'd trusted above all others. The room went dead silent. The music stilled. Guests sat frozen, processing the shock of what Jason had just revealed. Michelle's face drained of color, her mouth opening in disbelief, but no words came out. Terrence, once poised and confident, now stood as if he had been struck dumb, his once assured presence reduced to nothing more than a nervous wreck. Jason's voice, though steady, was laced with unmistakable hurt as he delivered the final blow. "For 2 months, I've known about this betrayal. And now, I stand before you not as a groom, but as a man who's been betrayed, publicly and irrevocably." The wedding, once a celebration of love, was now a scene of devastation, confusion, and heartbreak. Jason's decision to expose the affair in front of their closest family and friends, to rip apart the facade of happiness, was an act of bitter revenge. But was it a cathartic release, or did it only leave him with more questions and regrets? Why would a man choose this moment, in front of everyone, to air such painful truths? Was this the only way for Jason to reclaim his dignity? Or had he simply descended into a deeper spiral of anguish by exposing the ones he loved most? It's now 5 days after the chaos at the wedding, and the pieces of this tangled story begin to fall into place. To truly understand what's at stake, what led to Jason Walker's shocking public revelation, we must first understand the lives of those involved. These are not just random characters caught in an ill-fated moment. They are individuals with dreams, desires, and pasts that would shape the explosive event witnessed by so many that night. Jason Walker, 35, was the epitome of success. A self-made entrepreneur, Jason was charismatic and confident, someone who could light up a room with his smile. Raised in a close-knit family, Jason had always been grounded, taught to value loyalty above all. His parents had instilled in him a sense of responsibility, a drive to excel, and more importantly, to protect those he loved. He found a deep connection with Michelle Turner, a woman whose intelligence and ambition mirrored his own. But despite his confidence and achievements, there was always something more to Jason, something that kept him rooted in his relationship with his best friend, Terrence. Terrence Davis, 34, Jason's childhood friend, had his own complicated history. Known for his effortless charm and disarming smile, Terrence's charisma often masked a past filled with unresolved emotional wounds. Raised by his grandmother after his parents' divorce, he never quite found the stability that most people take for granted. Relationships, whether romantic or platonic, always felt temporary for Terence. He had an unsettling ability to slip in and out of people's lives without leaving much behind. Yet, despite his emotional distance, he was never far from Jason's side. In fact, he had become the brother Jason never had, always there to listen, always there to support. But as the years passed, a sense of tension began to build between the two men, something that neither of them was willing to confront. Then there was Michelle Turner, 33 years old, beautiful, and seemingly the perfect match for Jason. She had built a flourishing career in public relations and event planning, a woman at the top of her game. To everyone who knew her, Michelle was a woman who had it all. Successful, driven, and always impeccably dressed, she had become the epitome of what every woman aspired to be. But behind her polished exterior, beneath the glamorous lifestyle, Michelle carried secrets. Unspoken desires, fractured relationships, and a past that was carefully concealed behind a well-curated image. Her world, as perfect as it seemed, was fragile, a house of cards, built on lies that had been buried deep beneath her ambitious exterior. Leah Mitchell, 32, Michelle's best friend, was another figure in this complex web. Their bond began in college, and from the very start, Leah had been Michelle's anchor, her support through thick and thin. However, as time wore on, Leah began to see cracks in Michelle's carefully crafted world. What was once a strong, unshakable loyalty between the two women would soon be tested in ways that would force Leah to question everything she thought she knew about her best friend. Was her loyalty to Michelle truly unwavering? Or was there more at play than she could see? It was a love story that seemed destined for greatness. Jason and Michelle had been inseparable since their college years. Their romance was a whirlwind, fast-paced, full of passion, and undeniable chemistry. They were the kind of couple everyone admired, the kind that seemed untouchable. And in the midst of all this, there was Terence, always by Jason's side, always a fixture in their lives. At first, it seemed like the perfect trio, their friendship unbreakable. But as their lives became more entwined, the bonds between them began to shift. Jason trusted Terence with everything, from his deepest fears to his most cherished dreams. He was his confidant, his closest ally. And Michelle, too, found herself drawn to the man who had known Jason the longest. At first, it seemed innocent, a friendship that grew alongside their relationship. But as their connection deepened, something began to change. And like many changes in life, it was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A lingering glance here, a touch there. But these small moments would soon lead to the unraveling of everything Jason thought he knew about the people closest to him. As we move further into this story, we will unravel these hidden connections and dark secrets, piecing together the puzzle of how these four lives became entangled in a web of deception, betrayal, and heartbreak. It was a bond of love and trust that could not withstand the weight of its own secrets. What caused the slow unraveling of this seemingly perfect world? How did Jason, once so certain of his future with Michelle, come to expose the painful truth at his own wedding? And what does this say about the true nature of trust, friendship, and love? The answers lie in the past, buried beneath layers of time, choices, and mistakes. As the wedding day approached, everything seemed to be falling into place for Jason Walker and Michelle Turner. It was supposed to be the happiest moment of their lives, a celebration of love and commitment. Yet, beneath the surface of meticulously planned details, perfect flowers, elegantly designed invitations, the glimmer of expensive champagne, there was a growing darkness. This wasn't a story about two people falling in love. It was a story about the complexities of the human heart, the ways in which jealousy, desire, and betrayal can fester in the shadows, often unnoticed until it's too late. Jason and Michelle, the couple at the center of it all, had long been the picture of perfection. They met in college, where their love story unfolded like a fairy tale. Jason, a successful entrepreneur, was confident and charismatic, a man who had everything going for him, yet deeply devoted to Michelle, a stunning woman with ambition and drive. Their relationship seemed like the kind of story that would be written about in magazines, but behind the glossy veneer of their love was something darker, a history that neither of them could fully escape. Jason's best friend, Terence, was part of the equation from the very beginning. Childhood friends, Jason and Terence had grown up together, navigating the complexities of adolescence side by side. Terrence was charming, yet there was always an edge to him, something about his past that made him more complicated than the average man. Raised by his grandmother after his parents' bitter divorce, he had never quite figured out how to trust people, let alone form lasting relationships. Yet, Jason had always been there for him. And now, as an adult, Terrence found himself clinging to Jason for support once again after his breakup with his long-term girlfriend, Kara. 2 weeks before the wedding, Jason invited Terrence to stay at his apartment, offering him a safe space to heal and regroup. It was a gesture born of friendship, a man helping another through a rough patch. But what Jason didn't know was that the invitation, though well-meaning, would set in motion a chain of events that would unravel everything they thought they knew about their lives. During those few weeks of staying with Jason, Terrence found himself spending more time with Michelle. At first, it seemed harmless, just two people supporting each other, a comforting presence in the midst of their respective troubles. But as the days passed, something shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. They laughed at the same jokes, shared private moments, and, over time, the lines between friendship and something more began to blur. It wasn't just loneliness that drove Terrence to cross that line with Michelle. It was something deeper, an ache that had been with him for years. A profound lack of connection, a desire for validation and affection that he had never fully addressed. The cracks in his emotional armor, long hidden, were beginning to show. Michelle, aware of her own insecurities and vulnerabilities, found comfort in the attention Terrence offered. Perhaps it was not love but a need for reassurance, confirmation that she was still desirable, still needed in a world that often demanded more of her than she could give. But why did they do it? Was it simple temptation? Or was there something more at play? Was it the darkness within their souls that had been festering for years, waiting for the right moment to explode? Was it a fundamental flaw in human nature, the struggle for power, for control, for validation, that led them both to betray the one person who had always been there for them? The question isn't just about infidelity. It's about the psychology of betrayal. Terrence, the charming and seemingly confident best friend, had always been a man who struggled with his own sense of worth. Growing up, he'd been forced to navigate a broken family, one that had never provided the stability or emotional security he needed. His parents' divorce, the emotional toll it took on him, and the instability he experienced in his formative years made it hard for him to trust others. Relationships, for him, were always temporary, never rooted in true emotional connection. So when he saw Michelle, beautiful and emotionally available, he gravitated toward her. But this wasn't just an affair. This was a psychological breakdown of a man who had never fully understood how to trust, how to love, or how to cope with his own pain. Michelle's role in this story is just as critical. She, too, was struggling beneath a seemingly perfect exterior. She had worked hard to build a successful career, climbing the ranks in PR and event planning, but it had come at a cost. The pressure to maintain her image, to always appear perfect, successful, and in control, had worn on her. She couldn't afford to show weakness, couldn't let anyone see the cracks in her perfect facade. But in Terrence, she found an outlet. In his vulnerability, she saw someone who, for the first time in years, needed her. And she, in turn, needed him. It wasn't love. It was a dangerous cocktail of insecurities and desires, a shared need to escape the expectations that were strangling them both. As the days drew closer to the wedding, the tension between Jason, Michelle, and Terrence grew. To Jason, everything was moving according to plan, perfect, unblemished. He believed in the love he shared with Michelle. He believed in the bond he had with Terrence. But the reality was that the foundation of those relationships had already begun to crack, and the explosion would come in the form of a public revelation. The pursuit of justice, in this case, wasn't about courts or legal systems. It was about the moral reckoning that would come for each of them. Jason, blindsided by betrayal, would be forced to confront the painful truth that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. His quest for justice wasn't just about retribution. It was about understanding why this happened, why his closest friend, the man who had stood by his side for years, would betray him in such an unforgivable way. In the process, Jason would have to grapple with his own role in this tragedy. how his own blind spots and lack of awareness allowed the deception to unfold in the first place. This story, then, is not just about the crimes of infidelity and betrayal. It's about the deeper, more insidious forces at play, the psychological triggers that drive human behavior, the unmet needs, and the societal pressures that shape us. It's about the way the darkest parts of human nature can lie hidden, only to surface when least expected. And it's about the struggle for justice, not just in the courts, but in our hearts and minds, understanding why people act the way they do, and ultimately, learning from the mistakes of the past. As the wedding date approached, the air was thick with tension, unseen, yet ever-present. Jason Walker, the groom-to-be, had always prided himself on his keen sense of intuition. He was a businessman, after all, accustomed to reading people and situations with a sharp eye. But in the midst of wedding planning, amidst the flowers, the cakes, and the seemingly joyous moments, he began to notice small, subtle changes in Michelle's behavior, things he couldn't quite place, but that began to gnaw at him. Michelle, the woman he had loved for years, seemed distant, preoccupied. Conversations that were once easy and light now felt strained. Jason noticed that she was always glancing at her phone, carefully turning it face down whenever they were in the same room. There were quiet moments of discomfort, fleeting, but telling, when Michelle's laughter didn't quite reach her eyes. And then, there were the lingering glances, the kind that didn't belong. They were shared between Michelle and Terrence, her best friend, Jason's childhood companion. These looks weren't just casual. They were charged with something more, a silent language that spoke volumes in ways words could not. At first, Jason chalked it up to his own growing stress as the wedding neared. Perhaps he was imagining things. Maybe it was his own anxiety about the future that was making him overly sensitive. But as the days passed, the suspicions grew, until they could no longer be ignored. One evening, just 2 weeks before the wedding, Jason found himself alone in his apartment, pacing nervously as he awaited Michelle's return from a meeting with the wedding planner. His mind was racing, but so was his heart. Something was off. It wasn't just the small, unspoken moments. It was the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, and he wasn't sure how or when. He couldn't shake the nagging thought that something was happening behind his back, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Then, as if fate had led him to it, he caught sight of Michelle's phone, left carelessly on the kitchen counter, unlocked and glowing. In that brief moment, a storm of emotions hit him. Part of him screamed not to look, to walk away, to trust her. But another part, one that had been growing in the pit of his stomach, urged him to investigate. With trembling hands, he picked up the phone and, without thinking, unlocked it. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. It was a series of text messages that went far beyond casual conversation. They were intimate, flirtatious, even suggestive. Michelle and Terrence had been in constant communication, sending messages that spoke not just of their friendship, but of something more, something deep, something secret. The messages were filled with longing, with promises of things that never should have been said. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he scrolled through the conversations, each text message cutting deeper. One in particular stood out. "I can't stop thinking about that night. I know we said it was a mistake, but I don't think I can walk away from this anymore." The words were like daggers, and with each one, Jason's world began to crumble. The images of Michelle and Terrence laughing together, of the subtle touches and the quiet moments he had missed, all suddenly made sense. The affair that had been hidden in plain sight had now been unveiled, and there was no turning back. Flashbacks flooded Jason's mind, taking him to a time just weeks before, the night when everything had changed. Terrence, devastated after his breakup with Kara, had sought solace in Jason's home. Michelle, too, was struggling with the pressure of wedding planning. The weight of expectations, the stress of making everything perfect, had begun to wear on her. It was a shared vulnerability, a moment of emotional weakness, that brought Terrence and Michelle closer. And in one fleeting instance, a look, a touch, a whispered conversation turned what might have been a fleeting emotional connection into something more dangerous, more insidious. But the affair didn't just begin from emotional wounds. It was also a complex entanglement of need and desire. Terrence's grief over his breakup had left him raw, vulnerable. He had never truly dealt with the trauma of his past, the loss, the feelings of inadequacy. And Michelle, too, was grappling with her own insecurities, trying to juggle the image of the perfect woman with the overwhelming reality of her own vulnerabilities. Together, they found a kind of solace in each other's presence, something that was never meant to go beyond fleeting comfort, but quickly evolved into betrayal. The thrill of secrecy, the temptation of forbidden connection, slowly morphed into a dangerous game they were both unwilling to stop playing. Jason, for his part, couldn't understand it. How could Terrence, a man who had been his closest friend for years, betray him in such a profound way? Was it truly a crime of passion? Or was there something more premeditated beneath the surface? Was this a man who had been nursing resentment for years, biding his time until the right moment to act? Or was it simply the culmination of years of suppressed emotions, the breakdown of trust, the slow erosion of boundaries? Jason had trusted Terrence with his life, his heart. They had shared everything, successes, failures, moments of joy and sorrow. Yet here, in the cold light of this devastating discovery, Jason was forced to confront the possibility that Terrence had never truly been the friend he thought he was. What drove a man to destroy a bond that had been built over decades? Was it jealousy? Was it insecurity? Or was it a deeper, more insidious force? The need for validation, for control, for something that Jason could never give him? As Jason sat with the phone in his hand, staring at the damning evidence, he knew that the moment of reckoning had come. The wedding he had been planning, the life he had envisioned with Michelle, would never be the same again. And now, he faced a choice: to confront the people who had hurt him, to expose the truth, or to walk away, pretending that everything was still as it seemed. But was that even possible? Could he ever go back to the way things were, to the life he had so carefully built? And what of the people who had deceived him? Could they ever find redemption? Or was this betrayal a line that could never be crossed? The truth, now out in the open, left nothing but the chilling uncertainty of what would happen next. The truth, as Jason would soon discover, was far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. The betrayal he had uncovered was only part of the picture. What he didn't know, and what Michelle had carefully hidden, was a role played by someone he thought he could trust completely. Leah Mitchell, Michelle's closest confidant and best friend. Leah, at first glance, appeared to be nothing more than a well-meaning friend who had always been there for Michelle. They had shared countless moments, from late-night college study sessions to endless gossip sessions about their relationships, their futures. But in the dark recesses of Michelle's world, where secrets festered and lies took root, Leah was more than just a friend. She was a willing participant, an accessory to the affair that would ultimately tear apart both Jason's and Michelle's lives. Behind the scenes, Leah had known about the affair long before Jason had stumbled upon the truth. She had been Michelle's confidant, the one person Michelle could lean on when the weight of her choices grew too heavy to bear. But rather than advise Michelle to come clean, to stop the lies before they spiraled further, Leah chose a different path. She stood by, watching as Michelle waded deeper into the murky waters of betrayal, offering advice on how to keep the affair a secret, how to play the role of the loving fiancé while hiding a truth that would destroy everything. In one particularly telling moment, Leah and Michelle sat together, discussing the future. The wedding was just weeks away, and yet Michelle's heart was torn. As she confided in Leah, her words revealed the truth of her feelings. She wasn't sure about marrying Jason, a man she loved, but one whose expectations and plans for the future no longer seemed to align with her own desires. Despite this uncertainty, Michelle showed no remorse for her actions. The affair had become more than just an escape. It had become a twisted form of affirmation, a validation of something she had lost in her relationship with Jason. "I don't know if I can go through with it, Leah," Michelle confessed, her voice tinged with doubt. "But I don't want to hurt Jason. He's a good man. I don't feel the same way anymore." Leah's response was calm, measured, yet cold in its implication. "You have to do what makes you happy, Michelle. I just want you to be sure before you commit to anything." There was no mention of the affair, no warning about the potential consequences. Leah, in her own way, had made her peace with the situation. She was not a passive observer. She had chosen to align herself with Michelle's desires, no matter the cost. For Jason, Leah's role in the affair was the ultimate betrayal. Not only had Terence, his lifelong friend, crossed a line, but Michelle's most trusted ally had turned her back on him too. Leah, in her quiet complicity, had kept the secret, offering no hint of remorse. How could someone who had known Jason for so long, who had shared their lives, their most personal moments, stay silent in the face of such deception? What motivated Leah to protect Michelle's secret? Was it loyalty to a friend she had known for years? Was she so deeply invested in Michelle's happiness that she was willing to let the truth remain hidden, no matter the damage it would cause? Or was Leah, perhaps, complicit in the affair from the start? Could it be that Leah, in her own struggles, had secretly wanted Michelle to take the step toward ending her relationship with Jason, believing perhaps that Jason wasn't the right man for her best friend? Leah's actions left much to be questioned. She had been a confidant, a protector of Michelle's choices. And yet, in her silence, she had chosen to condone a betrayal of the highest order. Was it out of friendship? Or was it the result of a deeper, more self-serving need to stay close to Michelle, to remain part of her world, even at the expense of Jason? The more Jason thought about it, the more he realized how much he had misjudged the people closest to him. Michelle's betrayal had been horrific enough, but the fact that Leah had known, and had said nothing, was a blow to his trust that would be nearly impossible to repair. How could he ever look at her the same way again? How could he ever reconcile the woman he had known as Michelle's best friend with the woman who had silently participated in the downfall of his marriage? Leah's role in the affair revealed a darker side of human nature, a side where loyalty can be twisted into betrayal, where friendship can be distorted by personal agendas. And for Jason, it was clear that this was no longer just about a failed relationship. It was about the unraveling of everything he had once held dear, the destruction of trust on all sides. As the layers of deception continued to unfold, one thing became painfully clear. No one, not even those closest to him, was beyond suspicion. Leah's complicity raised a chilling question. Was she merely a passive observer, or had she been an active participant, feeding into Michelle's desires, helping to hide the affair that would soon implode everything Jason thought he knew? In the end, the truth about Leah's involvement would be just as important as the betrayal from Terence. And for Jason, the question of who he could truly trust would remain unanswered. Jason Walker's world had shattered. The man who had built a successful life, surrounded by loyal friends and the love of what seemed like a perfect fiancé, was now standing in the aftermath of betrayal. In his heart, a storm of emotions raged: anger, hurt, confusion. But beneath it all, there was something even more dangerous, a thirst for retribution. And in that thirst, Jason found clarity. He wasn't just going to let this betrayal slide. Michelle and Terence, the two people he had trusted the most, had destroyed everything he had built with them. Now, it was his turn to make them pay. Jason knew he couldn't walk away quietly. A part of him wanted to scream, to run, to disappear from the charade his life had become. But no, this wouldn't end with him leaving. No, he would make sure they understood the full weight of their treachery. The wedding, the day that was meant to mark a new chapter of happiness, would become a stage for something far darker, something more devastating. He made his decision. There would be no quiet resignation, no sobbing, no apology. Jason wasn't going to cancel the wedding. He wasn't going to give Michelle and Terence that easy out. Instead, he would confront them head-on. But not in private, not behind closed doors. Jason had bigger plans for them, a way to ensure they would never forget the pain they caused him. Jason called Michelle and Terence into separate rooms, their faces still blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. It wasn't the first time he had seen them together, and it certainly wouldn't be the last, but it would be the last time they would ever look at him with the same sense of safety. With a calmness that betrayed the seething rage beneath, Jason faced Michelle first, then Terence. "Tell me the truth," Jason demanded, his voice steady but icy. His eyes burned with a fire they hadn't seen before. "You owe me that much. Tell me everything." Michelle, her face flushed with guilt, opened her mouth, but no words came out. Terence shifted uncomfortably, as if the walls were closing in on him. There was no denying the obvious anymore. Jason had seen the texts. He had pieced together the late-night meetings, the secret glances, and the lies. Now, all that remained was the confession. Jason's voice grew colder. "I want you to admit what you've done. You don't get to walk away from this one." You don't get to walk away from me. For a moment, there was silence. Michelle, her eyes brimming with tears, whispered, Jason, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to hurt you. Terrence, his face a mixture of guilt and defiance, finally spoke, his voice barely audible. Man, I never meant for it to happen. It just happened. Jason's eyes narrowed as the words sank in. No, don't tell me it just happened. You knew exactly what you were doing. He turned away from them both for a moment, collecting himself. He needed them to understand. He needed them to know that they couldn't simply apologize their way out of this. But Jason had planned this moment long before he'd called them into the room. He wasn't going to let them off easy with a few tearful confessions. This was bigger than them. This was about power, control, and dignity. Jason had already made up his mind how he would make them pay. I'm giving you a choice, Jason said, his voice tight with resolve. You can end it now, right here, and call off the wedding before anyone else finds out. Oh! He paused, letting the weight of the silence hang in the air. Or you can face the consequences tomorrow. In front of everyone. You can tell them the truth, in front of all our friends, our families, everyone who came here to celebrate with us. The choice is yours. He stood there for a long moment, watching them both as they processed the gravity of his words. There would be no getting out of this for them. No second chances, no quiet apologies. Jason had seen too much, had been hurt too deeply, to ever allow that. As Jason turned to leave the room, a single thought burned in his mind. He wasn't going to be the victim here. Not again. He had been broken, humiliated, and betrayed. But he would be damned if he let Michelle and Terrence destroy his sense of self, his dignity, and his future. No. He would take control, and he would make them pay for every lie. As the hours ticked down to the wedding, Jason meticulously plotted every detail of his revenge. The speech he would give, the words he would use, the way he would expose their affair to the crowd, slowly and deliberately, so that everyone, his friends, his family, and, most of all, Michelle and Terrence, would feel the full force of the truth. Jason's plan was calculated, cruel even. But in that moment, he didn't care. The humiliation they had put him through was unforgivable. They had tried to ruin him, to destroy his life. The wedding, which should have been a celebration of love and commitment, would now become a public execution of trust, loyalty, and friendship. The question that lingered in Jason's mind, though, was whether this would truly satisfy him. Could this public act of revenge ever heal the deep wounds he had suffered? Would exposing them, humiliating them in front of everyone they knew, restore his dignity? Or would it only deepen the pain and anguish of what had already been lost? Jason couldn't answer that. But one thing was certain. This was the only way he could reclaim control over the shattered remnants of his life. And in the twisted, painful world of human betrayal, sometimes vengeance is the only language that makes sense. The wedding day had arrived, and what was supposed to be a celebration of love and unity was now charged with an electric tension that no one could ignore. The venue, once filled with the sounds of laughter and joyous anticipation, had taken on an eerie stillness. Guests milled about, awkwardly glancing at one another, their eyes darting back and forth between Jason, Michelle, and Terrence. They had no idea what was about to unfold. What was meant to be a beautiful occasion would soon unravel into a moment none of them would ever forget. Jason stood tall at the podium, his eyes scanning the room. The glimmering chandeliers above reflected off his polished suit, but beneath the sheen of the festivities, there was a storm raging in his chest. His voice was steady, controlled, almost eerily calm. He spoke with a confidence that betrayed no sign of the agony he'd been through, yet every word felt like a thunderclap, each syllable carrying the weight of his years of pain and betrayal. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason began, his voice carrying across the room. This day was meant to be a celebration of love, commitment, and trust. But what you don't know is that my fiancé and my best man have betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. The room went still, as if the air itself had thickened. A ripple of confusion swept through the crowd. Was this part of the speech? A joke, perhaps? But as Jason's eyes locked onto Michelle and Terrence, it became clear that this was no joke. This was real. His words were not meant to entertain or to charm. They were meant to expose, to hurt, and to force everyone present to see the truth. Michelle's face turned pale, the blood draining from her cheeks as Jason's revelation hit her like a slap. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted nervously toward Terence, who stood frozen, a look of shock and disbelief plastered on his face. His hands, once confident and steady, trembled at his sides as if he could not comprehend what was happening. Jason paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. The room had fallen into a tense silence, every eye on the stage, every breath held, as they waited for what would come next. No one dared move or speak. "I'm sure you've all noticed," Jason continued, his voice steady but cutting. "The lingering looks, the secret meetings. Well, it wasn't just friendly support. It was an affair. A betrayal. And now, the truth is out in the open." Guests exchanged confused, uncomfortable glances. Some looked at Michelle with disbelief, others at Terence, trying to process the words that had just shattered the illusion of the perfect wedding. Jason had given them no room to deny it, no room to hide behind false apologies. The affair was no longer a whispered rumor. It was now a public fact, exposed for all to see. Michelle, her face a mixture of shock and desperation, tried to speak, to explain, to apologize. "Jason, I never meant for it to go this far," she began, her voice shaky. But Jason cut her off with a sharp, unforgiving gaze. "No, there's no room for excuses," he said, his voice biting. "You've made your choices. And now, everyone here knows what kind of person you are." Terence, still standing motionless, his gaze fixed on the floor, seemed to shrink with every passing second. The man who had once been Jason's closest confidant now stood exposed, no longer the charming best friend but a betrayer caught in the act. The once solid friendship between the two men had crumbled, torn apart in the blink of an eye. The betrayal was too great, too devastating, and the moment too raw for anyone to look away. As the room sat in stunned silence, a sense of awkward discomfort began to spread. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of how to react. No one knew whether to look at Jason with sympathy, Michelle with pity, or Terence with contempt. It was a situation that no one had expected, and the gravity of the revelation was suffocating. But in that moment, Jason didn't care about the guests, their discomfort, or their judgment. He had done what he came to do. The truth had been laid bare, and no one could deny it anymore. The pain of the betrayal had been amplified by this very public exposure, but so too was the clarity of his purpose. He hadn't just sought to uncover a lie. He had sought to reclaim his dignity, to reassert his control over a situation that had spiraled beyond his understanding. The question now lingered in the air. Was this revenge truly justified? Had Jason, in his thirst for justice, gone too far? Did this brutal, public humiliation offer him the closure he sought? Or had it only deepened the wounds of betrayal? Was this the redemption of a man wronged, or a tragic misstep that would leave him with nothing but the bitter taste of vengeance? As the room waited in silence, the answer was not immediately clear. Jason had exposed the affair, but at what cost? The road to closure is never straightforward, and in his quest for revenge, Jason had turned the celebration of love into an unrelenting expose of his own heartbreak. In the end, was this the ultimate way to heal a shattered soul, or was it simply a punishment for a crime that could never be undone? And as the guests looked on, the real question remained. Could Jason ever move on from this, or would the scars of that day haunt him for the rest of his life? The revelation was complete. The damage, irreversible. And the true cost of betrayal had only just begun to reveal itself. The reverberations of Jason's wedding speech rippled far beyond the walls of that banquet hall. While the shock and humiliation of the moment were immediately evident to those in the room, the aftermath would unfold in ways no one could have predicted. What began as an act of emotional reckoning, exposing betrayal in front of a room full of people, would soon spiral into a series of consequences, both personal and legal, that would affect everyone involved. Jason had believed that the act of revealing the affair would bring him closure. A brutal unveiling of the truth, a way to reclaim some semblance of control in a situation that had left him feeling powerless. But as the days passed, the emotional satisfaction he had hoped for quickly gave way to a heavy, inescapable reality. Jason's actions had set off a chain of events that would haunt him far longer than the immediate sting of betrayal ever had. The following morning, after the storm of the wedding had passed, Jason sat across from his lawyer in a quiet, dimly lit office, the weight of the situation settling in. The lawyer, an experienced professional who had seen more than his fair share of messy breakups and revenge-driven actions, looked at Jason with a mixture of concern and disbelief. "What you did at that wedding, Jason," the lawyer began carefully, "is considered defamation. You've publicly humiliated both Michelle and Terrence. And while they might deserve some kind of retribution for their actions, the way you went about it opens you up to significant legal ramifications." Jason rubbed his temples, his mind spinning as he processed the words. "I thought I was taking back control. I thought exposing them would be the only way to get some closure. But now, it's all falling apart." The lawyer nodded, flipping through his notes. "You need to prepare for a legal battle. Michelle might file for emotional distress, and Terrence could pursue a defamation suit as well. And that's just the beginning. Your business relationships, your reputation, people are going to look at you differently after this. What you thought would be justice is now a potential nightmare." Jason leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the floor. He had won in the moment, but had he really gained anything of lasting value? His actions had come at a steep cost, one that he hadn't fully understood until now. In his quest for revenge, he had not only lost his fiancée and his best friend, he had also jeopardized his future, his career, and the very fabric of his social life. Meanwhile, Michelle's world had come crashing down around her. The support she once found in her close-knit family had turned into condemnation. Her parents, initially pleased with her choice of a husband, now saw her betrayal as unforgivable. In the days that followed the wedding, her mother refused to speak to her, and her father's silence was more deafening than any words could have been. Her friends, those who had once been by her side through every triumph and tragedy, now turned their backs on her. Some saw her as a victim, trapped in a toxic relationship, while others viewed her as a manipulator who had used both Jason and Terrence for her own personal gain. But the most painful part of it all was the realization that, despite the affair, Jason was the one who had loved her unconditionally. And in the wake of his public exposure, she was left with nothing but regret. Terrence, too, found his life upended. The public nature of his betrayal had burned bridges in a way no apology could repair. Friends who had once admired him now avoided him, and mutual acquaintances began to distance themselves. A man known for his charm and easygoing demeanor was suddenly an outcast, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. Facing the scorn of a town that had once embraced him, Terrence made a decision. He packed his bags and left, his life in the city now shattered. He wasn't just running from Jason's wrath. He was running from himself, from the deep shame of what he had done. But no matter how far he ran, he knew that the ghost of his betrayal would follow him, haunting his every step. As the weeks passed, Jason's initial satisfaction over the exposure began to feel like an illusion. Every corner he turned, he was confronted with the fallout. Endless meetings with his lawyer, difficult conversations with business partners who no longer trusted him, and a growing sense that his world had become unrecognizable. His emotional state, once numb in the wake of his initial revenge, had started to unravel. Was this the price of justice? Questions now loomed over Jason's every thought. Did his quest for revenge truly bring him peace, or had it cost him more than he could have ever imagined? The truth, he began to understand, was more complicated than he had ever anticipated. Revenge, he had learned it the hard way, never comes without consequences. And as Jason sat in his office, staring at the pile of legal documents that threatened to undo everything he had worked for, the bitter reality set in. He had fought for his dignity, but in the end, it seemed like he had lost much more than he ever intended to. The consequences of his actions had left him with far more questions than answers. Had he truly sought justice, or had he simply fed into a cycle of pain and retribution that could never bring back what he had lost? Was there any redemption left, or was this the final chapter in a story of betrayal, revenge, and heartbreak? Only time would tell. But for now, Jason was left to face the consequences of a decision made in the heat of emotional fury, with no easy path forward. Revenge, for a moment, had tasted sweet. But as the days turned into weeks and the consequences of Jason's decision rippled through every corner of his life, the emotional cost became undeniable. What had he really achieved? In the pursuit of justice, had he created more pain than he had alleviated? The questions began to gnaw at him with an intensity he hadn't anticipated. Was he truly in the right? Or Or had his need for vengeance clouded his judgment, leading him down a path from which there was no return? As Jason sat alone in his apartment, staring out the window at the city lights, his mind raced. He thought about Michelle, about the love they had shared, now tainted by betrayal. He thought about Terrence, the man who had been his brother, now his enemy. And in that silence, the reality of his actions hit him like a wave. He had exposed their darkest secrets to the world, but at what cost? Was the satisfaction he had felt on that wedding night worth the destruction that followed? For weeks, Jason had tried to move past the moment, trying to bury the guilt that kept resurfacing. But it was impossible. Every conversation, every glance from a former friend or colleague reminded him of the decision he had made. The shame, the regret, they festered inside him, creeping into every aspect of his life. He had broken something deep and unfixable. His world, once so certain and clear, had been shattered by a single moment of anger. In those quiet moments of reflection, Jason questioned everything. Could he have handled this differently? If he had chosen to walk away, to forgive Michelle and Terrence in private, would the pain have been easier to bear? Would his relationships have survived the storm? Or was this betrayal simply too great to overcome? Was there a path forward where revenge didn't cost him his future? The emotional toll had been profound, not only on Jason but on everyone involved. Michelle, once a symbol of perfection in his eyes, now carried the weight of her choices. Terrence, who had once been his brother, now lived with the knowledge that he had lost everything for a fleeting affair. And Leah, the friend who had kept secrets, now lived with the consequences of her own silence. The web of lies, betrayal, and secrets had fractured their lives in ways that could never be undone. What does justice really look like? Jason had thought that exposing the truth would bring him relief, but it only brought more suffering. What price had he paid for a moment of reckoning? Was it worth it? And if he could go back, would he choose to make a different decision, one that didn't leave him with these scars? The hardest part of a betrayal, Jason realized, wasn't the pain of the act itself. It was a long road to healing. Sometimes, even after the truth is laid bare, the wounds remain deep and unhealable. Some betrayals cut so deep that no amount of revenge can ever erase them. They linger, like shadows in the corners of your mind, reminding you of the cost of trusting, of loving, and of losing. And in the end, as Jason sat quietly with his thoughts, one truth became painfully clear. No amount of vengeance could change the past. The damage had been done, and he had to live with it. The road to healing, however long, would be his to walk alone. And so, Jason learned that sometimes the hardest part of a betrayal isn't the act itself. It's the long, painful road to healing. And some wounds, no matter how much revenge you seek, will never fully heal. What would you have done in Jason's shoes? Would you have sought revenge? Or would you have quietly walked away, choosing the harder path of forgiveness and healing? The answer, perhaps, lies within each of us, because sometimes the toughest decisions are the ones that shape our futures in ways we can never fully understand. Let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in Jason's place? Would revenge have been your choice, or would you have found another way to heal?